Paris. The morning of April 13, 1892. Spring during the Belle Époque was not merely a season, it was a state of mind. The air above the elegant Boulevard Malherbe was steeped in the fragrance of blooming chestnut trees, the expensive perfumes of ladies hurrying about their day, and the fresh brioche from fashionable bakeries. Within his opulent, yet surprisingly austere mansion, more akin to a laboratory and library than the residence of a multimillionaire, a man sat at a massive mahogany desk. His face, framed by a thick beard already touched with gray, was etched with wrinkles. These were not so much the marks of passing years, he was only 55, but the testament to sleepless nights spent in laboratories, endless journeys in rattling carriages, and a profound, bone-deep melancholy. This was Alfred Nobel, the proprietor of 93 factories across 5 continents, a brilliant chemist, the author of 355 patents, a polyglot fluent in 6 languages, an amateur poet, and perhaps the loneliest man on earth. Following a ritual established over decades, he unfolded a fresh copy of an influential Parisian newspaper. His gaze, accustomed to extracting the essence from complex chemical formulas and stock market reports, scanned the columns. Political intrigues of the precarious Third Republic. A dip in London Stock Exchange shares. An announcement for a new opera at the Grand Opera. The usual morning routine. Then he froze. His heart, accustomed to a steady, measured beat, stumbled, missed a stroke, and then began to pound with a furious, deafening force. On one of the pages, enclosed in a thick, mournful border, was his name. The newspaper impassively reported the death of Alfred Nobel. The journalists had made a monstrous, unforgivable error. A few days prior, on the picturesque azure coast of Cannes, one of the Nobels had indeed passed away. His elder brother, Ludwig, the oil magnate of Baku, a colossal figure who had transformed Russia's lagging industries into a gigantic, advanced enterprise that challenged the American Rockefellers. But the reporter, in pursuit of a sensational headline, had not bothered to verify the facts and had lightly buried the wrong brother. For another man, such a mistake might have prompted an angry letter to the editor or a dark joke among friends. For Alfred, it became a mirror from the inferno, into which he was forced to look for the first time in his life. The headline, printed in bold, unforgiving font, struck like a blow. Le marchand de mort est mort. The merchant of death is dead. And then followed the text, each word like a drop of acid slowly burning through his consciousness. Dr. Alfred Nobel, the publication stated impassively, who amassed a colossal fortune by finding ways to kill more people faster and more efficiently than ever before, passed away yesterday. He can rightfully be called a killer king, who profited from grief and suffering. In an instant, his entire carefully constructed system of self-justification collapsed. All his patents, all his titanic work, his sincere belief that he served progress, propelling humanity forward, all of it turned to dust, to poisonous smoke. In the eyes of the world, the very world he sought to change, he was not the genius who had paved the way for civilization through mountains and oceans. He was merely a fabricator of death, a Dr. Frankenstein of his era, whose name would forever be seared into history with red-hot iron, linked to the roar of cannons, the howl of shells, and the stench of torn human flesh. This erroneous obituary was not just a slap in the face. It was a verdict, a final and unappealable judgment from history, read to him while he was still alive. With horrifying, nauseating clarity, he understood that after his real death, they would write the same about him. Perhaps they would use more polite euphemisms, but the essence would remain the same. And this thought was utterly unbearable to him. Was this all that echoed in his mind, like a trapped bird? Is this all that will remain after me? The brand of a murderer, a cursed fortune built on blood, an eternal oblivion for all the good I tried to do? It was on this very day, in the profound silence of his Parisian study, that many biographers believe the seed of an idea was sown in his tormented soul. An idea desperate, brilliant, and utterly paradoxical. An idea that was meant not just to correct his legacy, but to shatter it, to reassemble it anew from the ashes, creating something entirely new, the eternal concept of a prize, the most prestigious and significant award in human history, an award for peace. But how did a man whose name had become synonymous with war become the planet's chief peacemaker? To understand this incredible twist of fate, we must rewind the film of his life to the very beginning. To the cold, Baltic wind-swept Stockholm of the mid-19th century, to a family where genius and destitution were inseparable twin sisters, and the sharp, bittersweet scent of gunpowder was more familiar than that of freshly baked bread. Childhood in the shadow of gunpowder kegs. Alfred Bernhard Nobel was born in the autumn of 1833. He was the third son in the family of Emmanuel Nobel, a man of fireworks, a man of catastrophe. An engineer, an architect, an inventor. He overflowed with ideas but utterly lacked business acumen. His greatest passion, his obsession, was explosives. He saw in controlled explosions the key to the future, a panacea for all construction and mining problems. But the Swedish army met his underwater mine projects with skepticism. Builders feared his gunpowder charges, and the family slowly but surely sank into the abyss of hopeless poverty. They lived in hunger, subsisting on watery gruel, mending their worn clothes until they were full of holes. It reached the point where bailiffs took away even the wooden cradle of little Alfred. Alfred himself grew up a sickly and frail child, a perpetual victim of colds, coughs, and agonizing migraines. Due to his poor health, he rarely attended school, spending his days in a dim room in the company of books and his own somber fantasies. But Emmanuel, a poor businessman, proved to be a brilliant educator. He personally oversaw the education of his sons, Robert, Ludwig, and Alfred, teaching them physics, chemistry, and engineering, infecting them with his indomitable belief in the limitless possibilities of the human mind. Salvation came from the vast and mysterious Russian Empire. In 1842, Emmanuel, fleeing debt prison, escaped to St. Petersburg. And there, in the empire's capital, his talent was finally appreciated. His mechanical workshop received a large military contract. Emmanuel's finest hour was the Crimean War. His naval mines, strategically placed around the naval fortress of Kronstadt, prevented the mighty Anglo-French fleet from even approaching the capital. The admirals were furious, and the emperor was delighted. Money poured in. The family reunited in Petersburg. From Swedish poverty, they entered a world of luxurious mansions on the Neva, balls at the Winter Palace, and intellectual salons. For young Alfred, this was a cultural shock and an incredible impetus for development. His father hired the best professors for his sons, including the renowned chemist Nikolai Zenin. By his late teens, Alfred was a brilliantly educated young man, fluent in speaking and writing 5 languages, including impeccable Russian. He avidly absorbed knowledge in chemistry and physics, but to his father's horror, his soul belonged to literature. He idolized the English Romantic poet Percy Bysshe Shelley and the French tragedian Victor Hugo. He wrote poems himself, full of youthful pessimism and world-weariness, and even began work on a verse play, dreaming of literary fame. But the practical Emmanuel saw him not as a poet, but as the heir to his engineering endeavors. To knock this poetic nonsense out of his son's head, as he called it, he sent him on a 2-year educational tour of Europe and America. This journey became a turning point in his destiny. In Paris, in the laboratory of the famous chemist Jules Pelleuse, the 17-year-old Alfred met a young Italian named Ascanio Sobrero. 3 years before their meeting, Sobrero, experimenting with glycerin, had synthesized a new substance. A heavy, oily, colorless liquid. He named it pyroglycerin. The world would know it as nitroglycerin. This substance was like a demon released from a bottle. Its explosive power was 13 times greater than black powder, but it was monstrously capricious and unpredictable. It exploded from the slightest shock, from sudden heating, from friction, and sometimes for no apparent reason. Cebrero himself feared his discovery until his death. During one experiment, an explosion disfigured his face, leaving scars for life. He considered nitroglycerin a curse of science and implored all colleagues to stay away from it, calling it too dangerous even to contemplate practical application. But the young Alfred Nobel was not afraid. He was captivated. He looked at this devil's tear and saw not only mortal danger but also unprecedented creative power capable of changing the face of the planet. He saw the future of tunnels piercing mountains, canals connecting oceans, mines reaching the very depths of the earth, and of course, wars that would become even more terrible. The obsession with nitroglycerin seized him entirely. This dangerous, like unrequited love, passion defined his entire future life. He did not yet know that it would bring his family fame and untold riches, as well as terrible, eternal sorrow. The race to tame the explosive demon had begun, and the first victim it would claim would be the youngest of the Nobel brothers. The golden age of the Nobel family in the Russian Empire ended with a deafening crack, like a snapped steel cable. In 1856, the Treaty of Paris, humiliating for Russia, put a definitive end to the Crimean War. For Emmanuel Nobel, this was not just the end of the war, it was the end of his world. The giant factory, which just yesterday had been operating in 3 shifts, producing not only mines but also steam engines, machine tools, and artillery carriages, suddenly fell silent. The new Emperor Alexander II, who was embarking on great reforms, looked towards liberalization and the reduction of military spending. He was little interested in the inventions of yesterday. The wheel of fortune, which had so generously rewarded the family, made a complete and ruthless turn. From industrial kings, the Nobels once again became bankrupts, nervously glancing around at an army of creditors. In 1859, Emmanuel Nobel, broken, aged, and ruined, along with his wife Caroline and youngest son Emile, was forced to flee Russia, leaving behind colossal debts and the ruins of his enterprise. It was not a return to his homeland, but a shameful exile, a return to the very poverty from which he had once escaped. The 26-year-old Alfred and his elder brothers, Robert and Ludwig, remained in Petersburg, desperately trying to save what was left of the family empire. But it was too late. The factory was sold at auction for a pittance. Here, the brothers' paths diverged forever. The pragmatic and energetic Robert and Ludwig, who inherited their father's engineering talent but not his fatal business naivete, turned their gaze southward, to the wild and untamed Caucasus. There, in the Baku region, a black, odorous liquid gushed from the earth oil. They saw the future in it. And starting with a tiny kerosene refinery, they created their own, no less grandiose empire, known as the Nobel Brothers Partnership, which became the main competitor to the American Standard Oil. Alfred was a man of a different caliber. Oil did not entice him. His mind, his soul, were still captivated by one all-consuming idea brought from a Parisian laboratory: nitroglycerin. This devil's tear became his obsession, his curse, and his only hope. Returning to his parents in Stockholm, to dreary poverty, he plunged headfirst into research, turning a shed in the backyard of their modest home into a chemical laboratory. It was here, amidst the caustic fumes of nitric and sulfuric acids, that father and son, soon joined by the youngest brother, 20-year-old Emile, began their deadly games. Every day was a dance on a volcano. Nitroglycerin behaved like a living, malicious creature. They tried mixing it with gunpowder, with sawdust, searching for a way to make it less sensitive. Explosions became commonplace. Sometimes windows were blown out, doors were ripped from their hinges, or one of the experimenters would be stunned for several hours. But Alfred was obsessed. And in 1863, he made his first real breakthrough. He invented the detonator. He realized that for reliable detonation of the unstable substance, a small but very powerful initial impulse was needed. A copper cap filled with fulminating mercury became the key that allowed the explosion to be initiated from a safe distance. It was a victory. The family, having borrowed money, immediately founded the world's first factory for the production of liquid explosive, nitroglycerin, activo agate. Orders from railway and mine builders poured in. It seemed luck had smiled upon them again. And then came September 3, 1864. The day that split Alfred's life into before and after, leaving an unhealing, bleeding wound in his soul. On that fateful day, work was in full swing at the factory in Helenborg. Among the workers was the youngest brother, 21-year-old Emil. He was the pride of the family, intelligent, handsome, charming. He had just graduated with honors from Uppsala University. With youthful enthusiasm, he threw himself into the family business, seeing a great future in it. Alfred himself was not at the factory. He had gone to negotiate with representatives of the Swedish state railways. Suddenly Stockholm shuddered from a deep, devastating blow, as if a giant hammer had struck the earth from beneath. In houses several kilometers from Helenborg, glass rattled and flew out. Above the site where the factory stood, a sinister yellowish-brown cloud slowly rose into the sky. When the smoke cleared, a deep, smoking crater, littered with charred debris, gaped where the laboratory had been. Everyone inside, Emil and 4 other workers, had been literally vaporized. Nothing remained of them to bury. For the family, it was an apocalypse. 70-year-old Emmanuel, the father, could not withstand the blow. He was struck by extensive paralysis. Until the end of his days, he remained confined to a wheelchair, a living monument to this tragedy. His eyes forever froze in an expression of silent horror and grief. For Alfred, it was personal hell. Guilt became his shadow, his eternal companion. "I killed him!" It pounded in his brain. "My obsession, my cursed oil killed him!" The city was enraged. Newspapers denounced him as the Stockholm poisoner and the mad Nobel. The authorities immediately passed a law prohibiting any production or even storage of nitroglycerin within the city limits and its surroundings. Any other man in his place would have given up everything, cursed the day he first heard of nitroglycerin. But Alfred was forged from different metal. Grief did not stop him. It turned his obsession into a sacred duty. He had to triumph for Emil's sake. He had to make nitroglycerin safe, so that his brother's death would not be in vain. Since it couldn't be done on land, he would work on water. Nobel bought an old cargo barge, anchored it in the middle of the cold, leaden waters of Lake Mälaren, and turned it into a floating laboratory, a phantom. Far from everyone, rocking on the waves under the piercing wind, he continued his deadly experiments alone. Becoming a hermit, an exile of science. He sought a stabilizer, an inert substance that, like a sponge, would absorb the liquid death, turning it into a safe paste. He tried hundreds of materials, from coal dust to crushed brick, but all in vain. The solution, as it often happens, came by chance due to an annoying mishap. When transporting liquid nitroglycerin in tin cans, they were packed with kieselguhr for cushioning, a light, porous sedimentary rock composed of fossilized diatoms. One day, Alfred, accepting a shipment, noticed that one of the cans had leaked. He braced himself for the worst, but there was no puddle. The insidious liquid had been completely absorbed by the kieselguhr, forming a dense, plastic paste that felt slightly damp to the touch. His heart stopped. This was the moment of truth. He carefully took a piece of this mass. It did not react to the warmth of his hands. He struck it with a hammer. Nothing. He held a lit match to it. It did not explode but burned with a steady, calm flame, like sealing wax. But when he inserted his detonator into this paste and lit the fuse, a deafening explosion erupted over the deserted waters of the lake. Eureka! He had found it. He had found the perfect balance. Kieselguhr made nitroglycerin absolutely safe for storage and transportation, but it did not prevent it from unleashing its full monstrous power upon detonation. The beast was tamed and chained. He gave his invention a powerful, catchy name, dynamite, from the ancient Greek word dynamis, meaning strength. In 1867, he received a patent that would change the world. He stood on the threshold of untold riches. He had avenged his brother's death, completing their shared endeavor. But he did not yet know that in taming one demon, he had unleashed another, far more terrible and insidious demon, which would stain his name, turn his life into a golden cage, and ultimately force him to seek redemption. The era of dynamite and the era of the merchant of death began. The invention of dynamite was not just another patent in the collection of the 19th century. It was the very Big Bang that gave birth to a new universe, the universe of industrial capitalism as we know it. If the steam engine was the heart of that era, then dynamite became its muscles, a raw, indomitable force capable of altering the very landscape of the planet. Humanity, which for centuries had hammered rocks with primitive pickaxes and cursed its weakness against the power of nature, suddenly received an instrument of almost divine might. Projects that yesterday seemed like the unfulfilled fantasy of romantic engineers became a reality. The colossal Siegenstadt railway tunnel, piercing the heart of the Alps and connecting industrial northern Europe with its sunny south, became the first and foremost triumph of dynamite. 15 kilometers of the hardest granite were traversed in record time. Where previously workers with pickaxes and inefficient black powder advanced centimeters a day, losing hundreds of lives in collapses and gas poisoning, Nobel's explosions now cleared the way by meters. The Corinth Canal in Greece, which turned the Peloponnese Peninsula into an island. The Panama Canal, connecting two oceans. Transcontinental railways in the United States, laying steel tracks through impregnable mountain ranges. All these wonders of engineering thought would have been impossible without the plastic red cartridges bearing the inscription, Nobel Explosives. The gold mines of South Africa, the copper mines of Chile, the coal mines of Germany. The entire world economy began to pulsate to the rhythm of Nobel's explosions. And here, in this brutal world of big money and ruthless competition, the melancholic, reclusive scientist Alfred Nobel revealed another facet of himself to the world. The facet of a steel-willed, pragmatic, and absolutely ruthless businessman. He did not take the easy path of selling licenses, as many inventors did. He decided to control everything himself, from production to sales. He began to build the first truly multinational corporation in history. His factories, producing dynamite and later other more advanced explosives, began to appear all over the world with astonishing speed. He gnawed his way into every market, engaged in endless, exhausting patent wars, did not shy away from industrial espionage, bribed officials, and crushed competitors with dumping. As a result, his industrial network expanded to 93 factories in more than 20 countries. He became the first citizen of the world in the modern sense of the word. His life turned into an endless series of trains, ships, hotel rooms, and negotiation halls. He could breakfast in Paris, dine in Cologne, and have dinner in London. Newspapers, following his movements, nicknamed him the richest vagabond in Europe. He was a workaholic, obsessed with his work to the point of complete self-oblivion, sleeping only 4 to 5 hours a night. As his empire expanded and its power grew, so too did the profound and desolate emptiness of his solitude. He possessed a lavish villa in an elite Parisian district and a magnificent estate in sunny San Remo. Yet neither of these grand residences could he truly call home. Their echoing, sumptuously furnished chambers were steeped in a profound, unnerving silence. Though he commanded thousands of subordinates, he had not a single true confidant to whom he could unburden his fears, his doubts, or the gnawing torment of his conscience. He remained unmarried, leaving no direct descendants. In his correspondence, laced with bitter self-deprecation and deep pessimism, he wrote to his brother Robert, "I would leave behind not only an obituary but also a will, Were there anyone besides your children to whom I could bequeath anything? I am aging, and a void surrounds me. And of course, there was the dark, sinister undercurrent to his triumphs, the aspect that fueled his fortune and relentlessly preyed upon his conscience. Industrialists built, but soldiers killed. Dynamite and its derivatives proved to be the perfect payload for artillery shells, torpedoes, and mines. Generals across the globe lauded Nobel. Every new conflict in Europe, or its colonies, brought him exorbitant profits. Alfred himself could not ignore this reality and, paradoxically, did not cease. Scientific curiosity and commercial acumen within him outweighed his moral qualms. In 1887, he patented ballistite, the world's first effective smokeless powder. This was a genuine revolution in warfare, making conflict even more lethal and, in a detached sense, cleaner. The moniker, Merchant of Death, bestowed upon him by the press, clung to him tenaciously. He attempted to defend himself, formulating a cynical deterrence theory, arguing that the more destructive the weaponry, the less inclined politicians would be to initiate wars. Perhaps my factories will bring an end to wars more swiftly than your peace congresses, he sarcastically penned to pacifists. But deep down, in his sleepless nights, he understood this was mere self-deception. In this scorched desert of loneliness and inner turmoil, only two distant, flickering lights illuminated his life, two women who had left an indelible, profound mark upon it, as different as dynamite for creation and dynamite for destruction. The first was Bertha Kinsky, an Austrian countess facing financial hardship, who answered his advertisement for a secretary in Paris in 1876. Their professional association lasted a mere week but laid the foundation for years of friendship and correspondence. The 43-year-old Nobel was captivated by her sharp intellect, her education, and her warmth of spirit. She, in turn, was struck by his genius, his erudition, and his pervasive sense of universal solitude. However, Bertha's heart belonged to another, the young Baron Arthur von Suttner, and unable to bear the separation, she fled Paris to secretly marry her beloved. Becoming Baroness von Suttner, she dedicated her life to the cause of peace, authoring the globally renowned anti-war novel, Lay Down Your Arms. In her letters, she became Nobel's conscience, his intellectual sparring partner, constantly chiding him for profiting from death and persistently urging him to channel his colossal wealth towards the pursuit of peace. The second woman was Sophie Hess, a humble flower seller from the Austrian spa town of Bad Ischl. He encountered her when he was 43 and she was a mere 20. She represented his secret, his desperate attempt to purchase that which money could not buy, simple human warmth and affection. He supported her for nearly 18 years, rented a luxurious apartment for her in Paris, showered her with money and gifts, and hired tutors for her. In hundreds of letters, he affectionately called her, "My dear Sophie." She, in turn, referred to him as, "My dear, kind old Grump." Yet, the chasm between them was unbridgeable. He was a genius living in a realm of ideas. She was a simple, grounded young woman who craved only fine clothes, entertainment, and a carefree existence. This relationship, fraught with arguments, jealousy, and reconciliation, brought him more suffering than joy. Still, he clung to it, like a drowning man to a straw. Thus, in the twilight of his life, Alfred Nobel was a man who possessed everything and nothing. An industrial titan whose name resonated across the globe, and a profoundly unhappy, ailing old man, torn apart by inner demons, the pangs of conscience, and unbearable solitude. And then, in 1888, he read his own obituary, in which he was unceremoniously and chillingly labeled a merchant of death. He saw his reflection in the eyes of history, and the sight was unbearable. He understood that neither his factories, his millions, nor his hundreds of patents could erase this stigma. Something else was needed, something radical, something that would compel the world to remember the name Nobel not with the sound of an explosion, but with a sense of hope. The decision had ripened, and it would be as powerful and as disruptive to the expectations of his contemporaries as his most significant invention. That ill-fated obituary in 1888 was more than just a shock to Alfred Nobel. It was a chilling, relentless revelation. The image of the merchant of death, so starkly drawn by the merciless pen of a journalist, lodged itself in his mind like a specter. It sat with him at his table in his opulent Parisian mansion, accompanied him on his restless journeys across Europe, and whispered in his ear in the quietude of his laboratories. The thought of posthumous reputation, once a mere background anxiety for his melancholic soul, now transformed into an overwhelming, obsessive preoccupation. He realized with chilling clarity that in the history books future generations would read, he risked being relegated to the company of history's greatest villains, a genius of destruction whose name would be spoken with a shudder and a curse. For a man who, deep down, despite all his cynicism, considered himself a humanist and an idealist, this prospect was equivalent to eternal torment in the Dantean Inferno he so loved to quote. He had to offer the world a response, an answer to the terrible accusation. And that answer had to be resounding, irrefutable, and as eternal as science itself. The years following this event were a period of profound, agonizing introspection. He increasingly distanced himself from the day-to-day management of his sprawling empire, entrusting affairs to his trusted associates. His health deteriorated, angina attacks became more frequent, and the ticking of the clock in his study sounded like a countdown. He corresponded with Bertha von Suttner, debating with her the paths to achieving peace. He sarcastically dismissed her peace congresses as banquets where one ate and drank well. Yet, her passionate faith in humanity, her tireless energy, seemed to ignite a responsive fire within his cynical, weary soul. He observed Europe, intoxicated by nationalism and an arms race, inexorably hurtling towards the abyss of a global conflagration, for which his ballastite and dynamite, supplied on an industrial scale, provided the very fuel. He needed not a chemical formula, but an existential one, a formula for redemption. On the 27th of November, 1895, feeling his life's journey drawing to a close, the 62-year-old Alfred Nobel, in Paris, at the respectable and somewhat subdued Swedish-Norwegian Club, made his final and most significant act. Away from the bustle and prying eyes, he sat at a table and, with a pen, on 4 pages of ordinary paper, set forth his last will and testament. He wrote it himself, without the assistance of lawyers, a profession he disdained for their ability to transform clear ideas into convoluted, multi-volume legal proceedings. For him, a scientist, this was the final formula, precise and exact. It was his third and definitive testament, superseding all previous ones. This document, drafted in secret from everyone, from his nephews in Sweden and Russia, from his business partners in Germany and France, from his longtime companion Safis in Austria, he carefully folded and concealed within his safe. This document would become his ultimate, most powerful, and most creative explosion. On the 10th of December, 1896, at his villa Mio Nido, my nest, in the sun-drenched Italian town of San Remo, an ironic name for a home belonging to a man who never truly built a family nest, Alfred Nobel passed away from a massive stroke. He died as he had lived for most of his life, in absolute solitude. Beside him were only his Italian servants, who understood not a word of Swedish and could only helplessly watch as their great, yet so unhappy, master faded away. In a cruel, Shakespearean twist of fate, to alleviate the angina attacks that had plagued him in his final years, doctors had prescribed small doses of nitroglycerin. The very substance to which he had dedicated his life, which had brought him fame, fortune, and infamy, had returned at the end to cut short his earthly journey. When the safe was opened and the will was read, the effect was akin to the detonation of a time bomb at the very heart of the European establishment. His relatives, the Nobel family in Sweden and Russia, who had already mentally divided his colossal fortune, estimated at 33 million Swedish kronor, an enormous sum, equivalent today to hundreds of millions of dollars, were in a state of shock bordering on fury. Their initial reaction was disbelief, quickly followed by righteous indignation. They immediately hired Europe's finest legal minds to contest the will, claiming their uncle had been of unsound mind in his final years, influenced by radical anarchists and female pacifists. King Oscar II of Sweden, upon learning the contents of the document, was enraged. He deemed Nobel's will an act of national betrayal. From the perspective of a 19th-century monarch, Nobel had committed the unthinkable. He had removed a vast capital from the control of the Swedish crown and placed it under the administration of a supranational, cosmopolitan entity. This was not merely eccentric, it was an undermining of the established order. The world's press erupted with headlines: "Mad will of the dynamite king, millions for a utopia, Nobel disinherits family for phantom ideals." The public was utterly bewildered. In an era when fortunes were passed down exclusively through inheritance, such a gesture seemed the act of a madman. And all because, in his testament, Alfred Nobel had decreed the following: his entire immense fortune was to be converted into secure securities, forming a fund. The annual interest from this inviolable capital was to be distributed as prizes to those who, during the preceding year, had conferred the greatest benefit upon humankind. He then clearly divided these prizes into 5 equal parts: for the most important discovery in physics, chemistry, or physiology or medicine; for the creation of the most outstanding literary work of an idealistic character; and finally, a 5th, the most paradoxical, the most sensational part, a prize to the person who had contributed most significantly to the fraternity of nations, the abolition or reduction of standing armies, and the holding of peace congresses. The Peace Prize. This was his brilliant answer, his posthumous gambit. The merchant of death bequeathed his blood-soaked fortune to the promotion of peace on earth. It was an act of supreme irony, a brilliant plan to reframe his own legacy. He used money earned from weapons to reward those who fought against war. A long and arduous battle for Nobel's will commenced. It was a veritable war. On one side stood the enraged relatives, the French government attempting to seize his assets, and the Swedish establishment. On the other, 2 young men, Nobel's executors, the chemist Ragnar Sohlman and the engineer Rudolf Liljequist. They displayed incredible tenacity and loyalty. Sohlman orchestrated a veritable covert operation. Fearing that French authorities would confiscate Nobel's securities held in Parisian banks, he secretly, disguised as personal effects, transported them by horse-drawn carriage and ferried them to Sweden. For 5 years, they fought in the courts, negotiated with the government, and repelled attacks from the press. It was a David and Goliath struggle, and they prevailed. In 1900, the Swedish king, with a heavy heart, approved the charter of the Nobel Foundation. And in 1901, on the 5th anniversary of Alfred's death, the first ever Nobel Prizes were awarded in Stockholm and Oslo. The dream of a solitary genius had been realized. And in 1905, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to his longtime friend, his intellectual conscience, Baroness Bertha von Suttner. The circle was complete. The will that had been called madness began its work. Alfred Nobel could not alter or annul his past. He remained in history as the man who gave the world dynamite. But with his final and most brilliant invention, the prize, he created for himself an alternative, immortal legacy. He did not erase the old curse, he wrote a new, radiant word over it. And today, when we hear the name Nobel, our first association is not the roar of explosions, but the triumph of human intellect and spirit. We think not of shattered rocks, but of scientists, writers, and peacemakers who move mountains of ignorance, disease, and hatred. The merchant of death did not become a saint, but he managed to perform the greatest alchemical trick in history. He transmuted the lead of destruction into the gold of human progress. He did not erase the old, terrible formula he had written for the world. He inscribed above it a new, far more powerful formula of hope. And in this lies his principal, most unsolvable, and most magnificent paradox.